Hello, I'm AlexRothwell, and in this screencast I will be showing the current state of my CMPPP project and explaining the reasoning behind such a project, where I'm currently at with the development, and how I feel it's come along so far, and what my plan is going forward to the final deadline. For this project I decided to work from a 2D isometric concept art piece similar to the concept art I had worked from for the 3D game asset project earlier in the year. My main goal for this project is to try and tell a narrative through my environment. As my chosen specialism is environment art, it's important that I would be able to convey a story to the player with them looking at the environment, being able to piece together that something important has happened there and there's not just another room. I usually take a more technical approach to environment art, thinking more about how a room would work in the real world, but not giving enough thought to the key items within an area. Through this project, I will hopefully gain an understanding of how to tell the player what has happened with just what's in the room. The other goal for this project was to improve my ability to work from a piece of concept art and how to improve upon it as circumstance allows, but to stay within the project scope. This isn't my biggest challenge, as I've gotten far better at staying within a project scope. However, it's still something I find I struggle with in personal projects and has caused failures in previous pieces of work. My plan was simple, as I knew exactly what my task was: create a narrative-based environment from the concept art that I have. I made a Trello outlining what I needed to do in order to achieve it and what I needed to make. Trello became the source of my asset list, as its drag and drop function for the cards makes marking finished tasks very simple, made keeping track of how many more I had left to do much simpler as well. As with all projects like this, I put together a mood board for the project. However, I didn't use the mood board to define the objects within the scene. Instead, I used it to define the scene itself. The concept art is black and white line art with little material detail and no color. To deal with this, my mood board was made from images of several different modern bars that, for the most part, were similar in aesthetic and design. I also kept most of these reference images as close to my color palette as possible. After starting to work on the 3D assets for the project, I found a problem with the concept art. I had made the objects that had real-life counterparts to their size, but the scale of everything in the concept was wrong. While smaller items were close to scale, some of the larger assets were either far smaller or far larger than they would have been in the real world. The asset that felt this most keenly was the booth asset, which can be seen relative to a human reference. The problem was the booth was far too large when made in comparison to the bar, which was also made in comparison to a human reference. This was made by a 180 by 60 by 60 box mesh, which represents the scale of the average male human. In the end, I remade both assets to the scale of the UE4 mannequin mesh. This, however, made the booth too small to fit in the dimensions of the room, but despite this, everything else I had made fit the scale of the room perfectly. My solution for this was to deviate from the concept art slightly, mainly in the introduction of a corner sofa and using the same assets to replace the booth next to the bar on the far wall. This I felt would not only fill the space left in excess by the booth assets, but would help give a more realistic feel to the environment as a whole, as using the booth limits space, and in a real-world scenario, a bar would want to be able to fit in more customers. In addition to this, I felt it would be good to add a small bouncer's corner at the entrance and have it obscured by some decorative wall visuals. In the corner I would use the corner sofa I had created and the hollow wall decoration to wall it off. As one of the walls is not visualized in the concept art, I had to fill in for that as well, as it was missed out. This wasn't anything particularly over the top, as I decided to go a bit minimalist and have plain walls with a decal over a portion of it, as on the other side I had the hollow panels, which would attract the eye enough, and I wouldn't want to overwhelm a player walking into the scene. The hollow panels are the key wall decoration in the environment, much like how they are in the concept art. The concept art, however, left what they were up to debate, so I saw this as a semi-futuristic scene. I decided a scrolling holographic panel would fit much better than just a static image. I had two ideas with this, the first being bubbles going up the wall. This keeps with my color theme and would make a more neutral feeling around the environment. The second being pink flower petals falling to the floor. The second of these would have stood out too much against the room, and I feel would have detracted from the narrative objects in the scene. The material for this was far simpler than I thought it would have been. It's 3 layered masks, each with a panning over a gradient at different speeds. This gradient is linked into 3 emissive nodes, which give it a glow effect, while the reflection node is added to give it the impression of glass pane, which is tied in with a vector parameter which controls its opacity. The textures used within the scene are a mix of textures created in Substance Designer and materials created in Unreal 4. For example, the floor panels are downloaded from Substance Source and then edited to be a different resolution and color, while the glass for the bottles and glasses are materials created in Unreal 4. I feel the quality of my work is up to a good standard. I'm working to a mid-poly workflow, the point of it being so that a model can be detailed enough but not require as heavy baking as a high to low poly workflow. It is more optimized towards gameplay. I feel my assets are hitting the mark for this workflow, and when the scene has all the finished assets and lighting implemented, it will be pretty good. The textures I'm using, I feel, are also a good quality. Unfortunately, PBR, which is realistic looking textures, isn't my strongest suit, but I feel that what I have so far is a good quality despite this. The scene itself is coming together quite nicely. The non-story elements are completed, and I have started on the narrative models. Unfortunately, I feel I'm a little bit behind on the work. Despite this, I'm happy with how it's come along. I'm not sure though I will have enough time to polish the scene and be able to implement the blueprinting for it to be a playable scene. Moving forward towards the final deadline, I will be completing the narrative assets and implementing them into my scene. The narrative assets are personal items that you'd find people bring into a bar, such as phones, wallets, and ID cards. There'll also be poker chips, dice, and bundles of money with iconography that would link it to a fictional criminal organization. After this, I'll be getting the lighting set up for the scene, aiming to have it lit as close to how a future bar might be lit, which I would imagine isn't so different from how bars are lit today. This, however, is where I feel most of the time over the next few weeks will be spent, as lighting is an extremely important part of how the overall look and feel of the environment will be. My stretch goal for the project was to make it playable and have some objects interactable, but with the current timescale, it's unlikely that I will be able to achieve this, and I would like to have a professional portfolio piece finished and polished by the end of this over something that would be interactive but unpolished.